Second Battle of Tumbleton came from nowhere and was utter chaos as told by those who managed to make it out alive. The dragon that came swooping down from the sky from out of the blue was Sea Smoke. His rider, Sir Adam Velaryon, determined to prove that not all bastards need to be turncloaks. How better to do that than by retaking Tumbleton from the two betrayers whose treason had stained him. Singers say Sir Adam had flown from King's Landing to the God's Eye, where he had landed on the sacred Isle of Faces and took counsel with the Green Men. Though the scholar must confide himself to no fact, and what we know is that Sir Adam flew far and fast, descending on castles great and small whose lords were loyal to the Queen, to piece together an army. Many a battle and skirmish had already been fought in the lands watered by the Trident, and there was scarce a keep or village that had not paid its due in blood. But Adam Velaryon was relentless and determined, and the River Lords knew much and more of the horrors that had befallen Tumbleton. By the time Sir Adam was ready to descend upon Tumbleton, he had near 4,000 men at his back. Benjicot Blackwood, the 12-year-old Lord of Raventree, had come forth, as had the widowed Sabitha Frey, Lady of the Twins, with their father and brothers of House Ripon, Lord Stanton Piper, Joseph Smallwood, Derek Darry, and Lionel Deddings, had scraped together fresh levies of greybeards and green boys that all had suffered grievous losses in the autumn battles. Hugo Vance, the young Lord of Wayfarer's Rest, had come with 300 of his own men, plus Black Trombo's merest swords. Most notably of all, House Tully had at last joined the war. Sea Smoke's descent upon Riverrun had at last persuaded the reluctant warrior, Sir Elmo Tully, to call his banner for the Queen, in defiance of the wishes of his bedridden grandsire, Lord Grover Tully. A dragon in one's courtyard does wonders to resolve one's doubts, Sir Elmo is reported to have said. The great host encamped about the walls of Tumbleton outnumbered the attackers, but they had been too long in one place. Their discipline had grown lax. The death of Lord Ormond Hightower had left them without a leader, and the lords who wished to command in his place were at odds with one another. So intent were they upon their own conflicts and rivalries that all but forgotten their true foes. Sir Adam's night attack took them completely unawares. Before the men of Prince Daeron's army even knew they were in a battle, the enemy was amongst them, cutting them down as they staggered from their tents, as they were saddling their horses, struggling to don their armour and buckle their sword belts. Most devastating of all was the dragon. Sea Smoke came swooping down again and again, breathing flame. 100 tents were soon afire. Even the splendid silken pavilion of Hobart Hightower, Lord Unwin Peake, and Prince Daeron himself. Nor was the town of Tumbleton reprieved. Those shops and homes and septs that had been spared the first time were now engulfed in dragon flame. Daeron Targaryen was in his tent asleep when the attack began, of the White inside Tumbleton, sleeping off a night of drinking at an inn called the Broady Badger that he had taken for his own. Hardhugh Hammer was within the town walls as well, in bed with a widow of a knight slain during the first battle. All 3 dragons were outside the town, in fields beyond the encampments. Though attempts were made to wake off the White from his drunken slumber, he proved impossible to rouse. Infamously, he rolled under a table and snored through the entire battle. Hardhugh Hammer was quicker to respond. Half dressed, he rushed down the steps to the yard, calling for his hammer, his armour and a horse, so he might ride out and mount Vermithor. His men rushed to obey, even as Sea Smoke set the stables ablaze. But Lord John Roxton had claimed Lord Footley's bedchamber, along with Lord Footley's wife, and was already in the yard. When he spied Hardhugh, Roxton saw his chance and said, "Lord Hammer, my condolences." Hammer turned, glowering. "For what?" he demanded. "You died in the battle," Bold John replied, drawing Orphan Maker, his Valyrian steel sword, and thrusting it deep into Hammer's belly, before opening the bastard from groin to throat. A dozen of Hardhugh's men came rushing in time to see Hammer die. Even a Valyrian steel blade like Orphan Maker little avails a man when it is 1 against 10. Bold John Roxton slew 3 before he was slain in turn. 3 conflicting accounts exist to the manner of the death of Prince Daeron Targaryen. The best known claims that the prince stumbled from his pavilion with his nightclothes afire, only to be cut down by the Mirish sellsword Black Trombo, who smashed his face in with a swing of his spiked morning star. This version was the one preferred by Trombo himself, who told it far and wide. The second version is more or less the same, save that the prince was killed by a sword, not a morning star, and his slayer was not Black Trombo, but some unknown man-at-arms, who likely did not even know who he had killed. In the third alternative, the brave boy known as Daeron the Daring did not even make it out of the tent at all, but died when his burning pavilion collapsed upon him. This is the version that's preferred by Grand Maester Munkin's true telling, and the version which is most likely true. In the sky above, Adam Velaryon could see the battle turning into a rout below him. 2 of the 3 enemy dragon riders were dead, but he would have no way of knowing that. He could doubtless see the enemy dragons, however. Unchained, they were kept beyond the walls of the town, free to fly and hunt as they would. Silverwing and Vermithor often called about one another in the fields south of Tumbleton, while Targaryen slept and fed in Prince Daeron's camp to the west of the town, not 100 yards from his pavilion. Dragons are creatures of fire and blood, and all 3 roused as the battle bloomed around them. A crossbowman let fly a bolt at Silverwing, we are told, and 2 mounted knights closed in on Vermithor with swords and lances and axe, hoping to dispatch the beast while she was still half asleep on the ground. They paid for that folly with their lives. Elsewhere on the field, Targaryen threw himself into the air, shrieking and spitting flames, as Adam Velaryon turned sea smoke to meet her. A dragon's scales are largely, though not entirely, impervious to flame. They protect the more vulnerable flesh and muscle structure beneath. As a dragon ages, its scales thickens and grows, affording even more protection, even as its flames burn hotter and fiercer. When 2 dragons meet in mortal combat, therefore, they will often employ weapons other than their flames. Claws black as iron, long as swords, and sharp as razors. Jaws so powerful they could crush through a knight's steel plate. Tails like whips, whose lashing blows have been known to smash wagons, break the spines of heavy desaries, and send men flying 50 feet into the air. The battle between Targaryen and Seasmoke was different. History calls the struggle between King Aegon II and his half-sister Rhaenyra the Dance of the Dragons, but only at Tumbleton did the dragons ever truly dance. Targaryen and Seasmoke were young dragons, nimbler in the air than their older kin. Time and time again they rushed one another, only to have one or the other veer away at the last instant. Soaring like eagles, stooping like hawks, they cried, snapped and roaring, spitting fire, but never closing. Once the Blue Queen vanished into the clouds, only to reappear an instant later, diving on Seasmoke from behind to scorch his tail with a burst of cobalt flame. Meanwhile, Seasmoke rolled and banked and looped. He would be below his foe, then suddenly he would twist in the sky and come around behind her. Higher and higher the 2 dragons flew, as hundreds watched on from the roofs of Tumbleton. One such said afterwards that the fight of Targaryen and Seasmoke seemed more like a mating dance than battle. Perhaps it was, but the dance ended when Vermithor rose, roaring into the sky. Almost at 100 years old, as large as the 2 younger dragons put together, the bronze dragon, with a great tan wing, was in a rage as he took flight, blood smoking from a dozen wounds. Riderless, he knew not friend from foe, so he loosed his wrath on all, spitting flame to the right and left, turning savagely on any man who dared fling a spear in his direction. One knight tried to flee before him, only to have Vermithor snatch him up in his jaws. Even as his horse galloped on, Lord Piper and Deadings, seated together atop a low rise, burned with their squires, servants, and sworn shields, when the bronze fury chanced to take note of them. An instant later, Seasmoke fell upon him. Alone of the 4 dragons on the field that day, Seasmoke had a rider. Sir Adam Velaryon had come to prove his loyalty by destroying the 2 betrayers and their dragons, and here was one beneath him, attacking the men who had joined him for this fight. He must have felt duty-bound to protect them, though surely he knew in his heart that Seasmoke could not match the old dragon. This was to be no dance, but a fight to the death. Vermithor had been flying no more than 20 feet above the battlefield, when Seasmoke slammed into him from above, driving him shrieking into the mud. Men and boys ran in terror or were crushed as the 2 dragons rolled and tore one another apart. Tails snapped and wings beat at the air, but the beats were so entangled that neither was able to break free. Benjicott Blackwood watched the struggle from atop his horse 50 yards away. Vermithor's size and the weight were too much for Seasmoke to contend with, Lord Blackwood told Grand Maester Munkin many years later, and he would surely have torn the silver-grey dragon to pieces if the Targaryen had not fallen from the sky at that very moment to join the fight. Who could know the heart of a dragon? Was it simple bloodlust that drove the Blue Queen to attack? Did the she-dragon come to help one of her combatants? If so, which one? Someone will claim that the bond between a dragon and a dragon rider runs so deep that the beast shares his master's love and hate. But who was the ally here and who was the enemy? Does a riderless dragon know friend from foe? We shall never know the answer to those questions, as all that history tells us is that the three dragons fought amidst the mud and blood and smoke second battle of Tumbleton. Sea Smoke was the first to die, when Vermithor locked his teeth into his neck and ripped his head off. Afterwards, the bronze dragon tried to take flight with his prize still in his jaws, but his tattered wings could not lift his weight. A moment after he collapsed and died. Targaryen, the Blue Queen, lasted until sunset. 3 times she tried to raise into the sky, and 3 times she failed. By late afternoon, she seemed to be in pain, so Lord Blackwood summoned his best archer, a longbowman known as Billy Burley, who took up a position 100 yards away, and sent 3 shafts into her eye as she lay helpless on the ground. By dusk, the fighting was done, though the Riverlords lost less than 100 men, whilst cutting down more than 1,000 of the men from Old Town and the Reach. The Second Battle of Tumbleton could not be accounted as a complete victory, for the attackers failed to take the town. Tumbleton's walls were still intact. Once the king's men had fallen back inside and closed their gates, the queen's forces had no way to make a breach, lacking both siege equipment and dragons. Even so, they wreaked great slaughter on their confused and disorganized foe, fired their tents and burned and captured almost all of their wagons, fodder and provisions, made off with 3/4 of their war horses, slew their prince and put an end to 2 of the king's dragons. At moonrise, the Riverlords abandoned the field to the Carron Crows, fading back to the hills. One of them, Ben Blackwood, carried with him the broken body of Sir Adam Velaryon, found dead beside his dragon. Bones would rest at Raventree Hall for 8 years, but in 138 AC his brother Alan would have them returned to Driftmark and entombed in Hull, a town of his birth. On his tomb is engraved a single word, loyal, in ornate letters, and supported by carving of a seahorse and a mouse.